Welcome back to Risky Business, a show about making better decisions. I'm Maria Konnikova.
And I'm Nate Silver. Today on the show, it's a politics-focused episode. We're going to talk about a story we think we have to talk about, at least a little bit, the assassination of Charlie Kirk, the conservative influencer. Tragic and scary event, and we're going to carefully have a little bit of a heart-to-heart about it. And then we're going to talk about more pedestrian politics, talk about the potential looming government shutdown in Washington and what both parties might be strategizing about for that.
Yeah, I think this is going to be an interesting episode, a really interesting conversation. And also for our listeners, this is going to be the first week where we are going to a twice weekly schedule of Risky Business. So we will now be in your feed twice a week. And yeah, we hope you enjoy that. And we'd love to hear your feedback about how you think it's going. On that note, Nate, let's turn to, what is... I think on the more serious side of topics, period, but in terms of the types of things we talk about at Risky Business, it's definitely on the very serious end of that, which is the assassination of Charlie Kirk. You had actually met Charlie, right, Nate?
I never met Charlie. No,
Oh,
I think he sent me a DM once and invited me on his show when it said something that riled up Democrats, and I ignore most invites, if we're being honest. It was nothing personal. I wrote a piece at my Substack about this, which is kind of how, you don't have to say anything. Why don't people just kind of be more restrained? And maybe we're violating that here. I'm not sure. Look, I do think that there is, I called it like an implicit fraternity. I guess it's a slightly gendered term, but I don't care. About like people who comment about politics for a living, right? And people who are in the public eye. And obviously, if you go on Twitter or Blue Sky, whatever else, right? There's a lot of debate about what type of political citizen Charlie Kirk was, but still, when somebody is assassinated, I spoke at in an open public forum in Ames, Iowa, at Iowa State University, 2 days after Kirk was killed. So, it's not in my head to be looking out at the crowd, and when you get the weird questions later after the show, it's like, okay, what's going on here? And we didn't want to create stress for the organizers, who very well organized event, but yeah, I don't know. I've certainly gotten death threats before, but Charlie Kirk is also a little bit hard to characterize, right? Like I was struggling with whether to call him an activist or an organizer or a provocateur or an intellectual or a media personality, right? Or what exactly? I'm not sure there's actually a perfectly comparable figure on the left, because the left and right are asymmetric, but someone who was very influential, right? Who kind of bridged the gap between, he was friends, I think just not friendly, but I think Trump would call him a friend with Trump himself, right? And had a quite large audience.
Yeah, I think whatever we call him, Nate, what I would like to stress is he was someone who exercised his First Amendment right incredibly well, eloquently, and freely, as he should have been able to do. I think that one of the things that people immediately, bring up is, gun reform, gun violence. And I do want to stress a truly important point, which is that we can't conflate speech and violence, right? People love to say that, oh, speech can be violence. No, violence is violence. Whether or not you agree with Charlie Kirk or you disagree with him, he was practicing free speech. He was engaging in debate, and that's something that, we should be doing in a democracy, right? We should be talking to people we agree with. We should be talking to people we disagree with. We should be having conversations. That's the backbone of critical thinking. That's the backbone of progress. That's the backbone of society. The fact that someone can be assassinated for exercising free speech is something that has happened before in this country, and not just in this country, but something that should absolutely never happen. And as you say, Nate, you were doing an event right afterwards, and it definitely, I think, as someone, we both do public events, we both do public speaking, I think it changes your kind of risk calculus, risk framing when you see, oh my God, have we gotten to the point in a society where people think that this is okay, right? That this is a legitimate response, that if I disagree with someone, violence is okay. And that does seem to be, unfortunately, a moment in which we're living. And but it's so important to distinguish, right, speech from action, and what I say from actual violence.
Yeah, and there's also a chilling
Absolutely.
effect,
Huge
right?
chilling
In terms of
effect.
people, what they say, and also whether they get invited. I mean, one case with some questionable similarities, but Salman Rushdie was attacked at a book festival in rural New York a couple of years ago.
Yep.
Um, there was a fatwa against him, and I suppose that was eventually partly fulfilled, right?
And he almost died, by the way. He was incredibly lucky to survive. People thought he was going to die. He has lost vision in one eye. It was a very, very close call, but that could have very easily gone the other way.
But part of the joy, I guess, of doing an event in a community, particularly a smaller community, is that the doors are open, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you go to Columbia now, for example, it's quite locked down. It's a private university, but that seems to go against the spirit of a university with its place in the neighborhood, its place in the community, right? Have you been to a political convention like the Democratic Republican Convention before?
I never have, no.
I mean, the security is incredible, not in the sense of, oh, it's amazing. I mean, I'm sure it's very good, or one would think, right? But it's also like, it takes an hour to get in there. It takes 20 minutes to get out of there, right? It's very cumbersome. And in some ways, it's like not very conducive to political protest or political speech, right? And of course, parties that want to suppress political protests often use threats of violence as an excuse to say, okay, we don't want you people protesting about Gaza or Bernie Sanders or whatever else in the convention halls, so we can't let you in for security reasons. But yeah, I mean, look, in some ways, there's not that much to say about, if you don't know him, about Charlie Kirk. You know what I mean? Like, there's this whole game about like using this as a positioning exercise for where people fit into the discourse, and I don't know. I was fucking shot like on a university
Yeah.
campus in cold blood, right? And it's like, I mean, no one even has the pretense anymore of, oh, let's quote unquote not politicize this. And by definition, although there's a little bit of ambiguity still in like the shooter's motivations, I wouldn't say that much necessarily, but some, right? By definition, an assassination is a political act, right? And, I think this is becoming more common. I mean, there's some debate about that fact, right? But like, I don't know. I mean, it was just last year when Trump got shot. And I'm going to be a little jokey about it because he survived, and that was kind of the mood about it, right? He had that I had just busted out of a poker tournament, the World Series of Poker. I'm like,
Equally
Maria,
important things,
I won't
Nate.
see you for dinner because I busted out, and I think somebody just shot Trump. But immediately it was clear that Trump
Yeah.
had survived and had this triumphant moment, and so it was almost, I was kind of out wandering around on the strip getting a sad little dinner with the other people who busted out, and people there were kind of excited, right? It's like, oh, that's cool, he survived, right? And that kind of detracted from the magnitude of what that event had been and how scary that could have been. And I think you're seeing now what happens when you create somebody who can be a martyr potentially.
And I'll go a step further, Nate. I think that that was a precursor to another moment that people made light of, which was the December assassination of Brian Thompson, the CEO of United Healthcare, right, where people actually made Luigi Maggione into kind of this hero, right, folk hero. Like, yes, he went after the bad guys. And we talked about it on the pod back then, where like, holy shit, guys, this is a horrible reaction. Like, this is not what you should be. I don't care what you think about, healthcare in America, or what you think about United, or all of these things. This is not the answer. Violence, this is not okay. This is never something to be celebrated. And yet people were celebrating it. So I think that we've seen kind of this progression that in some ways has led us to this moment where you think, oh, first of all, this is the right way to solve it. And secondly, like, I could even be a hero for killing someone who, people disagreed with or thought they did something bad. It's just so profoundly fucked up to think in those terms, and to think that this is just something you do, right? This is why we have society. This is why we have laws. This is why we have, norms of behavior. This is why we live, in a civilization and not in the Wild West, where the way that you solve things was to duke it out with guns.
Yeah, look, the writer Freddie DeBoer had a good essay about this on Substack, and I guess now we are kind of scratching the surface against kind of like root causes. And if you're a listener who disagrees with our theory, that's fine. These are difficult conversations to have, right? But like, he noticed that like these aren't necessarily straightforwardly ideological crimes. They're kind of mishmashes of somebody who oriented a certain way politically, brain rot from the internet, and like quite confused in a way, right? Because if you were trying to like discredit a movement, you wouldn't create martyrs. It usually doesn't work, right? It backfires and it kind of reflects the fact that like I was going to say things are spinning out of control a little bit. Look, the way I kind of look at civilization, like, again, it's amazing that you're in New York and it's a city of 8 billion people and everyone has different objectives on their mind. And there is lots of petty crime from day to day and other things. And yet the kind of center holds, right? And like,
Yep.
but the center holds, I think, sometimes narrowly, right? Where you have a lot of, I'm going to confuse centrifugal and centripetal, right? You have a lot of forces pulling out into chaos. And then you have forces holding people together, including policing, including common decency, including common sense, right? And kind of everything in between. And like, it might not take that much for things to fall out of equilibrium. And maybe social media is that. And, if you look at some of the impact studies of like social media on X, Y, and Z, they might show a relatively minor impact, right? Oh, I think X gets 5% worse or 10% worse. It does seem to be correlated with greater negative emotional affect among younger people, younger women more than younger men, but both young people in general, right? But like just the cumulative effect,
Yep.
You also have people who are getting fired for saying thoughtless or I was going to say un-PC, which is, I think it is kind of like a political correctness issue, right? You have people fired for saying things that in some cases are I think, stupid and tone deaf, but
still a fireable offense. Like, that's what the Soviet Union was in a lot of ways. That's why it worked. That's how dictatorships work. People are afraid to say what they mean because they're afraid they're going to get reported. They're afraid that it's going to have really horrible consequences in their lives. That's not how democracies are supposed to work. Like, that's not our world.
Here's also where I'm sympathetic to conservatives, right? Where, in many settings on a constellation of issues related to personal identity, race, gender expression, etc., right? There were a lot of costs for expressing certain points of view for a period of time. And I think conservatives are reasonable to be resentful. And of course, they're not, MAGA is not a higher-minded movement, right? MAGA is a movement that's about a lot of things, but partly like, you guys are all hypocrites, right? You're self-serving elites and you're hypocrites, and so we're not going to make any pretense, really, of being better, but you're no better than us, and we're in power, so now it's our turn, right?
Yeah, and even going a step further, so there was a piece in the New York Times that pointed out that Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth had said that the agency was monitoring and tracking any military personnel who celebrated or mocked Kirk's death. And Christopher Landau, the Deputy Secretary of State, said that the administration would be stripping visas from any individuals who celebrated Kirk's death. So, this is like, it's going further and further, right? From, oh, you might be fired, to you might have your visa taken away. And I've even heard murmurings of, well, why don't we take away citizenship from people or passports from people who are expressing these opinions? That's frightening. Everything about this moment is frightening, I think.
Yeah, look, I remember the days after September 11th felt kind of similar to this. I think these events are similar in many respects to terrorism. I would have no problem if someone wants to call it like an active stochastic terrorism or domestic. I don't know any of the qualifiers on terrorism, right? But like, they're intended to like provoke a reaction, and I guess they do.
Oh, absolutely. Everything about this is horrifying, starting from the fact that someone assassinated. Like, that's That is horrific. The fact that we're living in a moment where people think that this is an acceptable action. And I want to also point out something that you mentioned about New York and like the fact that New York functions, and sometimes you think, oh, how precarious is it? There's actually a lot of work in psychology that shows that it is quite precarious, right? Social norms are precarious, that norms of behavior are precarious, that we are often kind of walking on a razor's edge where it can go in one direction or another depending on what prominent people say, you know, depending on what people think, that these things do shift and can shift very rapidly. So I think we should just remember that, you know, social norms that we take for granted, we shouldn't take for granted. They do need to be protected, or we might end up devolving, which is what I think we're witnessing right now. Speaking about, you know, the increased political violence, security, I think this is a good moment to shift gears a little bit and talk about the potential government shutdown and funding, because one of the things that is happening is that the White House has requested $58 million in security funding for both the executive and the judicial branches after Charlie Kirk's assassination. This is basically they're trying to insert this as part of the stopgap bill to prevent a government shutdown, which is looming on October 1st. So this is clearly something that like is being used. I don't know if it's being used as a pretext or if this is actually something that they should be doing, but it's interesting that this is making its way, you know, from something that happened last week to something that is a key provision in a bill that can prevent the shutting down of the government, which, by the way, Nate, I feel like we have an impending government shutdown so frequently these days.
Should I give a quick backgrounder for?
Yes,
I have
please,
a story
please
coming
do.
on this week. So, like in the spring, was it March or whatever? In the spring, Republicans had to pass a continuing resolution to keep the government open. People thought that bill might get stymied in the House, where the GOP has a very narrow majority, and they passed it, party line vote, I think with one exception on each side. It went to the Senate, where for that type of legislation, the filibuster is still under the rules of the Senate the Republicans set up when they took office, you know, in January, right? So ultimately, Democrats debated a shutdown, public commentators debated a shutdown. I actually wrote a post, I guess it was after Schumer had conceded or was about to concede, saying Democrats should have had a shutdown. I thought it was a good opportunity. I thought they could highlight Doge spending cuts and take advantage of Elon Musk's unpopularity. But Schumer and what was it, 7 or so other Democrats voted for cloture to end a filibuster, and so therefore the bill passed. However, that resolution was for 6 months, and it expires at the end of this month, September. I was going to say 31st. I think it's, how many days is September?
30.
August
30.
Damn. September 30th,
You remember,
I believe.
Nate? I think I told you about my little, the little thing that you can use.
I know. September's one of those
for people who
confusing.
look at me.
September, you could go either way.
You look at your knuckles: January, February, March, April, May, June, July, August, September.
September feels like a 31, though, right?
It's a 30.
It's an important month. It's a pretty fucking important month. September.
It is an important month.
Might be the best month.
It is. It's such a great weather month, back to school month. I love September, but it's a 30-day month. Unfortunately, good things never last, Nate. Good things never last.
Okay. Sorry, I lost. Okay. So anyway, this time though, it's Democrats.
So October 1 is when the government would shut down.
This time though, it's Democrats who seem to want to shut down. So Chuck Schumer indicated late last week that he had canvassed his caucus. And they are.
That sounds really inappropriate somehow. Will you canvass my caucus? Sorry, guys, this is important. All right, so he'd canvassed his caucus, yes.
And there was appetite in the Democratic caucus to make demands, I suppose, about healthcare. They want to extend Obamacare, subsidies, and Medicaid, and restore Medicaid cuts that were made in the One Big Beautiful Bill Act. Not my term for it, the official piece, name of the legislation. And meanwhile, lots of center and left of center commentators from Ezra Klein to Robert Reich to everybody else have been saying, yeah, we need a fight. Democrats can't concede to this, although they don't really agree on the whys or the whats exactly, right? But there's agreement that something must be done. that Schumer was so much of a pushover last time that this is one of the few points Democrats have leverage. And when you want to cash that in for like a big media moment or for actual concessions, and those might be kind of opposite strategies, by the way, that you have to, it's time to do something.
Yeah, I mean, I think that Schumer learned his lesson a little too well from the last time when he got such horrible coverage, such horrible press for making the deal, right? Where he said, "Look, I'm doing what needs to be done," and he came off looking terrible, and people are like, "Oh, had you just had a backbone, all of this would have been avoided, and we should never have passed this to begin with." So I think he learned that lesson a little bit too well. But I think that the other strategic moment, and I'm not writing a piece about this, Nate, so please, feel free to chime in, is I think that Democrats are seeing this as a moment where they can really start creating kind of new messaging for midterm elections and for presidential elections moving forward, to say that we are the true party that's protecting the people. The reason that we're doing this is we want you to have your health care, your Medicare. We want it not to be cut. We want all of these benefits that are being lost with rural communities for the working man of America. We want to protect this, and that's what we're trying to fight for. And I think that's also part of the messaging and part of the things that they are trying to make sure get changed in the reconciliation before the bill moves forward.
I mean, there are different theories, right? I mean, look, part of it is like, are you familiar with like the chess term Zugzwang? I don't know how to say it. And yeah,
I have read it. But let's explain it, because my familiarity is very passing, to the point where I too, Nate, do not know how to pronounce it.
it's a situation where every move you make is worse than no move, right? That you would prefer that it was your opponent's turn. And like, so like, let's say Democrats supplied the votes for the continuing resolution. I mean, and try to de-escalate this. I mean, they would look like pushovers. Schumer in particular. I mean, first of all, he is up for re-election not next year, but in 2028. You have a lot of people coming after Schumer, right? There are lots
Yep.
of to state obvious names, AOC. She doesn't run for president, for example, or Zoran. Who knows, right? He can't be president because he was born in Uganda, but he could run for Senate, right? But a lot of talented, and all the MSNBC loving Democrats, right? But there's going to be a lot of demand for Chuck Schumer's seat, right? And as well as if he survives electorally, then maybe his role as majority leader. And so he kind of, I think, has to do something, right? And the kind of Ezra Klein argument is that if you supply votes for this continuing resolution, are you not tacitly endorsing this government that you say is authoritarian and acting in bad faith and corrupt, even before you get to the fact that they are eviscerating a lot of priorities that Democrats hold dear? And I kind of buy that. I kind of buy that as a default in politics, that doing the thing that you believe in and or is consistent with your overall messaging, right? I think that's worthwhile. And we've seen, I think, repeatedly that like Democrats, sometimes their rhetoric exceeds what they're actually willing to do, right? I think if they had really regarded Trump 2.0 as an existential threat, they might have thought more carefully about how fit Biden was to run for a second term, and they might have
Yep.
thought more carefully about whether Kamala Harris was the optimal person to replace him, and so on and so on. Might have thought more carefully about. We've been through all that on this program before, right? So I support the notion that like put your money where your mouth is. On the other hand, there's like not really a good end game for Democrats here, I don't think, and it's not clear what end game they want, right? Because on the one hand, I think the Ezra case is more like we just want to have change the narrative, change the discourse. And by the way, Trump's approval rating is not really moving very much, right? So like it's like not like he's in
Where
some
is it
slow
right now,
downward
Nate?
spiral. It's about a net -7, -8, right? So it's like, whatever, 43% approve, 51% disapprove, somewhere in that range, right? And it has not really moved. It has not moved because of Jeffrey Epstein. It has not moved because of whatever scandals there are, right? We don't have any data yet. We'll be affected by the Charlie Kirk, the first segment, right? But like, it did seem to move for tariffs about 6 months ago during Liberation Day was a big drop in April, and it's been steady since then. And so like, there is a notion of increasing variance for Democrats, I think. and kind of changing the discourse, changing the dialogue. But, here's the issue. I mean, if you offer a deal on healthcare, the problem is it's kind of a deal that like might be good for the GOP. You know what I mean? Where like all these swing state representatives might say, yeah, actually, I'm pretty uncomfortable with these Medicaid cuts, right? And okay, I'll take the deal, right? Uh, I don't know if Trump would sign it, but like,
No, I think some of the biggest losses in medical coverage are happening in states like Arizona, where somewhere around like 300,000 people are set to lose coverage under the big beautiful bill come October 1st if changes aren't made. And Arizona is obviously a state that's very important for Republicans. So there are, I think this is an issue that could be bipartisan in the sense that it's something that Democrats care about, but it's actually something that can help Republicans. And I think that if the GOP is thinking of midterm elections, right, if they're thinking about, okay, which seats are up, then they might start realizing, hey, like, if this bill passes as is, right, if these cuts actually pass, if all of my constituents suddenly realize that, oops, like, where's my medical coverage? Like, what just happened? Maybe I'm not going to get reelected. Like, maybe I'm not going to look as good. And you wonder why they didn't think about this before when they were passing the big, beautiful bill. But I've been shocked at how many people have been like, oh, well, I didn't really read that part of it. I didn't really realize that was in here. And I'm like, wait, I'm sorry. What? Like, isn't that your entire job? Or you have aides to do it and to summarize it for you so that you don't have to read it. But like, come on. Like, what kind of what excuse is that?
I don't know if we talked about the change to the tax treatment of gambling laws, right? That also was kind
No,
of
we actually haven't talked about that on the show. So I think that's something
That's
that
what
we
Democrats
can.
should filibuster for until gambling deductions are fully restored. I will not provide votes for this authoritarian menace. You know what I would do if I were Schumer? I would demand concessions on tariffs.
Interesting. Say more.
So there are a couple of reasons, right? One is that
By the way, sorry, is this in addition to the healthcare or
no, I don't like. I
instead
think the
of?
healthcare stuff. I mean, look, Republicans, congressmen are stupid, right? So like the fact that like this would be, they're fucking stupid. Like, why would you go into Congress if you had, like, honestly, like, why'd you go into fucking Congress if you had like real talent to contribute? I guess I know some congressmen. I take that back, but like.
Nate. Okay. And my co-host has gone on the record as saying that congressmen are fucking stupid.
If I ever testify before Congress, no, but like, I mean, okay, yeah, just take the deal. It's a good deal. It's the
that is a good deal. So,
like, I mean, just take the deal. You're going to get something that like it will actually soften Trump's image and help you be reelected.
That's true,
right?
but it's
and
also good for
say,
people.
Oh, we held up. We were so tough, right? It's like, okay, deal.
Yeah, no, so I think that the healthcare stuff, though, is great because it's also helping people. But now talk about tariffs. Why do we think that they should also be pushing for tariffs?
So for one thing, like, again, am a buyer of the Ezra argument that, like, you might want to pick something that is more abnormal. And the tariffs are abnormal both in the sense that we haven't had these tariffs in almost 100 years and the fact that, like, you're abrogating Congress's role to regulate taxes and collection of spending. In fact, the case will be litigated by the Supreme Court, so it might become a moot point eventually. But like, I think that is more of a pain point between Trump and the GOP. I think highlighting, the economic news is worthwhile for Democrats. We've had bad jobs reports lately. We also had a revision that covered Biden's last year and Trump's first half year, right? Where like actually we've been overestimating the number of jobs that were created, maybe a little bit easier to understand how people were fed up about the economy last year. But like, I think tariffs are a better pain point. I think they're a harder deal for the GOP to take. They're the one issue that's been proven to hurt Trump's popularity, and they get a little bit at the extra, shall we say, constitutionality, right? Not respecting traditional norms, whereas like you could have the healthcare fight with Mitt Romney or Nikki Haley as your president, right?
So you're saying that they should pick something that really seems to be out of the ordinary. That is like something that I don't know if but like that has surpassed all of the norms and is really
it's hard because like if you I mean, the thing, a lot of things that are out of the ordinary are totally non-germane to budgeting, are obscure or are unpopular, right? I mean, like,
Sure. But tariffs is something that can be a point around which you can actually coalesce. And it is something that is more, I wouldn't say popular, but more in the popular mind because there are these downstream effects that are starting to be felt. By the way, we haven't really talked about, the Fed that much on the show, but this is all tied up, right, with the Fed, rate cuts, what's going to be happening there. Like this is a much broader conversation.
yeah. And I mean, look, if you had things like, oh, okay, well, Trump shouldn't try to fire Lisa Cook, one of the chairman of the board of the Federal Reserve chairwoman, right? It seems like this mortgage stuff has been trumped up in her case, or he shouldn't have fired the BLS commissioner. Like those things might appeal to someone like me, but they're pretty freaking esoteric to like the average person. Whereas tariffs, you have a little bit of everything, right? You have a message about how the economy is not doing very well. You have a message about like Trump overstepping his bounds, and that still gives you a legible cause to fight. This is one of the most unpopular things that he's done.
Do you think, I'm genuinely curious, do you think that they would have a shot? If they actually push the tariff stuff, because I think you're absolutely right. Like this is genuinely unpopular, and before it was passed, a lot of Republicans were like, "Whoa, whoa, whoa! He's not actually going to do this, right? We know that this is terrible. It's terrible economics, terrible policy, terrible for the country, terrible for all of this." But then everyone just completely fell in line, as with everything basically that Trump has
It's
done, and stood behind him. So, do you actually think that this is plausible that they could win on this?
Well, I'm not sure you want to win. You know what I mean? I mean, look, at some point the shutdown will end, right? I mean, by the way it might end, Democrats have to be prepared for this, right? Is Republicans might say, okay, we are going to get rid of the filibuster for passing budgetary legislation, as they've already gotten rid of it, or Democrats in some cases too, for almost everything else, right? To me, that's almost a feature and not a bug. I mean, just this past week, Republicans plan to change the Senate rules to make it easier to like nominate Trump appointees in batches, right? If you're not going to like have it for that stuff, then who fucking cares about not that budget stuff isn't important, but like it's such a thin reed that like, okay, look, you have a trifecta, you run the government, pass your fucking bill, right? You got to change the rules. You don't respect rules in the first place, right? Who cares about the fucking filibuster? And by the way, we're not going to use a filibuster. We're hoping to win back a trifecta in Congress in 2028. We're not going to use a fucking filibuster, right? There's going to be so much damage that you did that we're going to have a day one agenda of getting all this stuff undone. Now I sound like Gavin Newsom or something like that, right? But like, yeah, the end game is that probably Republicans nuke the filibuster and then pass their bill. And Democrats have this confrontational moment. Maybe it goes well, maybe it goes not so well, right? But like it, changes the vibe at a time when the vibe is, I would argue, not going that great for Democrats.
So let me ask a very naive question because I think it's one that people kind of reflexively don't even think to ask. And I partly know the answer, but I'm actually curious to hear your answer to this. Why are we always talking about like trying to avoid a government shutdown? What actually happens if this doesn't happen and the government shuts down? How does that affect us, right?
I'm not a
How
legislative.
bad is it? How bad is it?
So services that are deemed inessential can get shut down. I mean, examples people point to is national parks can get shut down, that you have less TSA staffing, for example. Government facilities of different types are closed. Certain types of checks don't go out. I mean,
So basically the same shit's that's already happening
well,
without
this
the
is why I
government
like this is why I
shutdown.
like the Doge ping it to Doge, right? It was because then
Yeah.
they wanted to turn a bunch of stuff off and see what happens. I guess it's kind of the opposite of like throw a bunch of shit at the wall. It's like turn a bunch of switches off and see what breaks. And
And a
so
lot of
kind
stuff
of
started breaking.
any shutdown effects would have been disguised in that. Here, I mean, look, Trump will have a lot of power to determine, to both interpret the rules liberally and color outside the lines quite a bit, right? And I think he will, in ways that could be advantageous to him. I mean, this is kind of one of the, friend of the pod, Matt Glassman, wrote a post about how actually this is probably a bad idea, the shutdown, because like when you're not the party in power, you don't have a lot of power, right? And like the advantage of like, to use the poker term, you're kind of always in position if you're right. You get to see what, and also this has been telegraphed, right? Republicans are aware. They can read the New York Times too. They can read Ezra's piece, and they can read what Chuck Schumer says to the Washington Post. And I'm sure they've prepped messaging and a strategy, and that makes it harder. But yeah.
Yeah. No, I think these are all important things to consider. I think this is an interesting take. Let's see what ends up happening, and if we end up using tariffs as well. I do think that even though it's good for Republicans, I'm glad that the Democrats are pushing for healthcare as well, because that's also pretty damn important. But let's get tariffs in there. I think that's a great idea, and hopefully we can avoid the more serious consequences of a shutdown. On that note, Nate, are you going to be playing any poker or doing anything interesting in those lines this week, or are we just all politics now for now?
I think I'm coming to the NAPT in Vegas in
Yeah.
November. No, this is going to be like if I do play the NAPT, like a 4-month break in between poker tournaments. I play cash games once or twice a month. But yeah, I'll be fresh for that, Maria. I'll put it like that.
Yeah, I will also be fresh for the NAPT in November, the Poker Stars event that I'll be playing. And stay tuned, guys. We might end up doing a Risky Business meetup at that point. This has been a interesting segment. Obviously, an important one as well. And I'm very, very curious to see how this moment, which is so precarious on so many different fronts, how it ends up playing out.
Yeah, I can't say I have a great feeling
about
this
Neither
one.
Can I.
Yeah.
No, I'm not particularly optimistic right now.
On that note, join us for. All right, Maria. Well, I hope you have a good week, and remember, audience, you're going to hear from us again this week.
Yes,
it's a 2-episode paradigm now. It's an interview with Elie Honig about his new book, When You Come at the King, which is all about special counsels and what it takes to prosecute the president.
Yeah, and from here on out, you can expect that double drop schedule from us every single week. So congratulations, everyone. I'm so glad that we can be a part of your routine. Yes.